Alberto, is there anything from a UX design perspective or research that you would like to add to that vision for an ideal or the kind of the perfect storm, the perfect world UX?
Yeah, so basically there's been quite a number of principles already enumerated, which are key, but I think that ultimately what we're all discussing and in terms of what we're actually aiming for in terms of world UX, that those principles of collaboration, of embedding, of concept communication, of understanding what are the needs and requirements of the user and the people who are actually going to use the product, it all speaks ultimately to the fact that localization is UX, and we have a responsibility in terms of whatever we put in front of our users across markets to make that experience work towards whatever their requirements are. And so that's the thing with UX design and research, is that they are not always natively aware of localization, and building those bridges definitely helps. And in terms of world UX, and there's a key distinction as well, is that there isn't a universal UX in the sense that it's never one thing that can serve everybody in the world. That's impossible. But we should think of UX with a universal in mind. We should think of it as something that should be inclusive, that should be accessible, and should be targeting the appropriate audiences in a way that is very close to what they actually require. So obviously, me working in research, my team is very, very connected to the design and localization parts, because whenever we test, for example, a product across different markets, that's basically what we're looking at, is how do we think about the user in that specific circumstance, in that specific market. And so usually pairing up and collaborating on that level of being very connected to not just design and localization and research, and have that triad really supported also by whatever is coming from QA, whatever is coming from feedback in the markets, whatever can be gleaned as well from the tests and the research that we do. It's important that the localization part is an inherent component of UX, and that's the aspect where what kind of form that will take will depend on the corporate environment, will depend on the team makeup. I think that's really what Ryan and Tarja were alluding to in terms of collaboration is key, because unicorns are very, very few. And if you can use the resources you have in-house effectively, then that's half the battle, because bringing people in is really what world UX speaks to, is being inclusive and also having that translate into the way that you work.
Great, thank you very much, Alberto. So we've looked at the why they belong together, and the what world UX or the ideal world UX may look like, even though there isn't such a thing as universal UX or sort of the perfect world UX. I'd like us to look at how do we get from where we are today to that ideal, right? To where we want to be. Maybe some of the challenges that you guys have experienced throughout your own journeys. And I would love to hear also from our attendees, from our audience today, just put in the chat rather than in the Q&A, but if you could put in the chat kind of in one word or two, what is your major challenge today? And I'm going to turn to Ryan just in terms of the challenges that you have experienced over the last number of years in your role at Line, and how you've overcome them. What advice you would give our audience, be it on the localization side or on the UX side, to kind of progress through this journey towards a world UX?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, the challenge I mentioned earlier about doing things at scale is something that I think is a big challenge. And the way to do that is just consistently innovate and try to find ways to automate things. So, on my team, I have like 3 awesome PMs and 5 writers, and they're constantly giving new ideas about how we can improve parts of the process. automate certain tasks. If you can have a localization engineer, that's amazing. We tried to hire one for a long time, couldn't find one. So we're trying to do it all basically as we can, but that will really help. The other thing is keeping people on the same page about what your role is. I saw one of the people asked questions about working with teams that might be resistant to integration. And I think being very clear about what your role is and what you're bringing to the team is something that's a constant challenge. Even if you can get people on the same page, new people will come into the company. A lot of places, it's not integrated well. So they might have a different idea of what your role should be. So explaining what you're doing and doing a sort of self-advocacy is actually a constant challenge that we have to do. Even here with like, this is why we're localizing, this is what we're doing. You know, we're not just a simple translation team. We're actually writing and we're taking the needs of the business into consideration. All those very basic things. It's basically like constantly having to like teach people what the localization is and what we do. So that, I think that's a never ending challenge for the job. So if you get started down this road, just be prepared for that.
Thank you. Thanks, Ryan. Tarja, from your perspective, again, you have been managing the sort of kind of cross-functional teams for quite some time. What challenges have you faced? What would be your top advisor or top tips?
I think that's definitely one of the challenges for me in the past has been kind of, getting the understanding to the other teams of what localization is and what are the things that the localization manager is actually interested in. Because usually the idea is that you are interested in the translations and the languages and producing a language version. But there are so many things that we've covered here. There's so much data that you have to follow on a daily basis, basically, when you're a localization manager, and all of these different things that you kind of have to be aware of all the different things that the other people in the company are doing. You have to understand what developers are doing and kind of speak everyone's language. But the biggest challenge has probably been, as you're trying to create ROI for your languages that you're managing and kind of create ROI for localization and producing quality localization, it's really difficult if the research is done, for instance, just with the English text, and then decisions are made based on that kind of feedback that you get from English users, and then you try to just translate that into other languages. So kind of getting that understanding of what localization means in a broader sense, that's probably it. But also I think that's usually getting this kind of collaboration has been easy. I like to harness technology to help in the challenges. When they're talking about collaborating with writers and with UX design teams, usually there's this piece of technology that you can put in the middle that will get people excited about working with localization, for instance, and it will make it easy because there's this kind of this underlying thought, even if you haven't really been working with localization, it's the same with development teams. There's this kind of weird thinking that localization is difficult and localization is it's slow and it slows things down. And that's usually as a result of not having the right technology in place in your company to collaborate. So usually what I've done to overcome these challenges with the collaboration is just to find those processes and find the tools that will make the process work. For instance, using a design tool where you can push strings directly into your localization management tool. Those kind of things that will make that will kind of leave time for thinking. When you take out those kind of tedious tasks from the middle.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you very much, Tarja. Sergio, from your perspective, I think at some point in our previous conversations, you had talked about sort of the challenge, first of all, to bring design and writing together. And now you had achieved some sort of technology as well that had helped with that further collaboration and sort of automation and streamlining. Would you like to share with us?
Yeah, sure. As Tarja was just saying, there's people who think that translation is just slow processes. And we just discovered by ourselves because we didn't know about it. That is quite the opposite. We just to let you know about our background. We started back in the day with spreadsheet with screenshots, which is like okay to get the job done, but of course not the way to go. And then I remember going 1 year ago to other meetups to know about it, how to improve this process. And of course, there's a long way for that. But then we just moved to Trello, just for asking for translations, to give context, where are the users that's going to read that and everything else. So, okay, we're improving. And then when I was talking about the developer that helped us, there was a developer in our team who said, hey, I just read documentation about PhraseUp, which is a content management system to enter translations. And he said, do you think we could make a collaboration between Figma and PhraseUp? And I was like, wow, I didn't know about that. It looked super hard back in the day, and it wasn't. And right now we have a system in which we can, either the US writers or people who is translating, just translate everything in Figma, which is, you can see really how it's gonna be seen for users. And then we just literally 2-3 clicks, you just send it to PhraseUp, to the content management system. And it helps for sure. It helps us and it helps developers also. And what's more important is that it helps users, because you can see from the very beginning how it's gonna be seen. And this is one of the teeny things with technology that, as Tarja was saying, it may seem like, oh my God, this is impossible to achieve, and it's doable. I think one of the biggest key challenges is that you need to spot, you can see it, fuck-ups or the spots for improvement in your process. I think we all suffer them, but we don't spot them. I would recommend you to try to spot them and just section them like, okay, these are my problems here. And once you have them spotted, you will know directly what to do, but you will know what to address, and just go one by one. And as we said before, step by step, try it works for you. And if not, just move to the other one. But for sure, it's going to be an improvement.
Okay, great. So Trello for collaboration, and then Figma and PhraseUp in terms of what you guys are utilizing. I think at some point in our previous conversations, Slack was kind of one of the channels for collaboration that you guys had mentioned as well. So that's great. And I see that there's a lot of questions. I know that we're running a little bit behind. So Alberto, I'm going to get you to share perhaps some of your own experience, again, coming at it from a design perspective or research perspective. How you've overcome them, or what sort of advice would you give to our audience to get from where they are today to where they want to be?
Yeah. So in my personal path, obviously coming from localization, there was a certain set of skills that I had to acquire in order to move into design and then research. And it's really, I find that localization people are naturally curious. They have this kind of vision to learn and to improve their skills and acquire that Swiss knife. I think that one of the things that definitely helps is to take online courses. For instance, like Interaction Design Foundation has quite a few that are very accessible, they're for free, and they are very helpful in understanding the basics of UX. Also, in terms of the basic skills, even if you're not aiming to become a unicorn, it's just important to understand some of the basics of layout, design. And if you're working in localization for a while, you've developed an eye for that for sure. You've got internationalization concerns, different aspects of wrapping, and different aspects of potential issues with long strings. And these are all things that can help in collaborating and discussing these issues with design teams. But again, the principle being that localization doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's an environment around it. If the team doesn't have access to UX writing as such, it means that usually the copywriters or whoever is managing the content might need also some assistance from a data perspective. And it's good to engage, for example, with, even if you're building a business case, or if you're just thinking about how to take the next step towards, emancipating localization in your environment. It's good to look at analytics, for example, for specific markets, seeing what the traffic is like, engage those kinds of conversations, because you can definitely use those to your advantage in making the case for more investment or more capacity for the team. And the other thing as well is obviously in research, we're usually doing user testing, which is a very simple way of getting somebody that speaks a different language, sitting in front of even a pseudo-localized prototype or a different version of the product, and getting feedback that way. And that usually brings to light a lot of design issues that then are naturally relevant for the UX teams. But also it starts off this conversation on the other level, which is any user of any market is going to have a response, and sometimes just showing video clips and bringing that to the conversation within the teams really helps to build awareness and more and a more prominent role for localization. So there are different angles that you can latch on. On a personal level, definitely taking some courses and getting into it by yourself, but also hopefully getting the company to sponsor you on that. And also on a team level, engaging with research, making the case of localization as another component of UX really does help, but it's always reliant on persistence as well. You have to be patient in some cases.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Alberto. I know we're running over time, but Pat, I'd be very keen to hear what you have to say. And I know in some of our previous conversations, we were talking about at the end of the day, you know, money and securing budget and kind of getting leadership buy-in and all of those things. So from your experience again, how what sort of advice would you give? What sort of challenges you have experienced? What strategies have you applied?
Yeah, the first thing actually I'm going to address is I saw a question come up about writing. Someone didn't have writers, and I think they were getting text from PMs or POs, and it was poor quality. And so this is something I faced. So I'm going to answer that question specifically and then go back. First thing is, if you Google controlled natural languages and try to create something like that in your own limited way in work. So a controlled natural language is, it's like a subset of English. And phrases are basically structured in a certain way and everybody learns them. So if you ever watch TV and you see a captain on a ship, a modern day ship, speaking to some other captain, they all have to learn this maritime English. So they all say things the exact same way, so that if you're not a native speaker, but you've learned this version of English, then you understand each other. And the reason for that is back in, I think, the 70s or the early 80s, there was a flip. Up before that, like 70% of the crews on ships with international trade were all English speaking, and then it flipped over, and then they were mainly international, but they all had to communicate with each other when they were passing each other in the straits of wherever. And so you've got this, and you've got it in aviation and in weapons technology, where you have all these people who work in different countries, but they all have to communicate with the same language. And this controls how they write stuff. So they might write a sentence where it's allowed to say, you can close a circuit, you can close a door, but they say, but you're not allowed to say, don't stand close to the engine. They'd say, don't stand near the engine. So there's actually software out there that will parse through your text and say, you don't say it that way, you say it this way, and then that's acceptable. And so that then removes confusion in text. Now, that might be too far for any of us, but the point is, if you get an understanding of how this works, you can start to put restrictions on yourself and how things are said, and how to restructure sentences so that it makes more sense, and there's a pattern then you follow afterwards. So that's the first thing, controlled natural languages. And the second thing is readability scores. So you can get certain websites, and Microsoft Word does this as well. If you go into, you know, the grammar and all that, and you turn everything on, there's a particular option. You get a score for your text when you run the spell check. And this will convince your PM or your product owner if the text is good or bad. This isn't an opinion, this is an algorithm, and it's used internationally. And it gives you a score, and whatever it is, like 70 or something, anything below that is below the minimum, and it's really very poor. So if they give you text and they say this is great, and you think this is rubbish, you can get a score and say, look at this score, this is really poor, but I've rewritten it and now this is a good score. Then at least that's factual information you can come back with. It's not an opinion, you know, it's a number. So that's another thing. Related to the controlled natural language, there's a book written by a guy, on this called Globish, and he has a site. So it's Globlish, Globish, and it's basically a business English, but the idea is English language reduced to the most common 1,500 words. And if you put your text in there and anything beyond the most common words, it flags them. Now, if it's a technology, terminology thing in your industry, you can keep it. But if it's a complicated word, you could find a simpler version and then bring your reading level down to a simpler level, and it's easier. Hemingway is another site. You put stuff in there, it flags things that are in the passive voice rather than the active, all those kind of things. And it's all ways of fixing up quality of your text if you think it's poor. Before I had writers working with me, this is the sort of stuff I had to check into and to try and improve the quality of my source, because some of what I was getting was very poor. So that's just that answer there.
Great.
Going back to sorry, yeah.
No, go ahead. We're just we're a little over time, so
yeah. Sorry.
No worries. Thank you.
For me, in localization, when I was in Microsoft, there was a tipping point. They started to make more money from the non-English product than from the English product, and so companies are going to get that. If they think localization is just translation at the end, you're underestimating it. It really needs to be there, and it really needs to be taken that your future could be with your non-native or language. So you really got to go out there and spread it around. On a personal level, there's no magic bullet for this. The person has to go out and look for access to designs if they're not getting it. Explain the problems, explain how you're going to fix it. You got to chase it up. It's just down to the person. And I'll leave it at that. I'll just leave it at that.
That's great. No, really appreciate it. And the fact that we've run over time, it means that this is it's not only a hot topic, it's something just genuinely, this is where our industry, where the localization industry needs to be. This is where world UX needs to go. And I'm afraid we're not going to have time to answer all of the questions. We've alluded to some of the questions in the Q&A. What I would like to commit to, and I'm sure the panelists will be very happy to oblige, is that we're going to take the questions and answers, guys, and we're going to answer them. When you get the link to the recording for today's session, you will get the answers, our answers as well to the questions. I think that is fair enough for everybody. And I would like to see, and actually we are going to have a follow-up to today's roundtable. We're going to have a workshop, a more kind of deep dive, more sort of practical workshop on World UX in the new year. So stay tuned. We will confirm date and details in the coming weeks. But in the meantime, feel free to connect with the panelists, with myself, kind of continue the conversation. There is a lot of momentum. There is a clear need, and all that's left for me is to thank the panelists so much for their time, for generously sharing their time. For Ryan, especially, you're on the other side of the world, so it's past midnight if I've done my maths right. And I just very much look forward to kind of sharing such a deep conversation with you guys. Again, thank you to the attendees. Thank you to everybody who has stayed with us for the slightly over the 60-minute mark. And yes, we will for sure reply to your questions, continue to share, kind of spread experience, share the knowledge, and move things forward.